They found the mansion at dawn, still smoldering. The fire had been brutal, the kind that didn't simply burn wood and fabric, but erased identity. What remained of billionaire Greg Benson and his wife, Lillian, was barely recognizable. Two bodies, reduced to what heat always demands. Investigators said it looked suspicious, too intense, too complete. However, the official report would describe it as a tragic accident, a gas leak, a terrible coincidence. The media would mourn the billionaire, the public would pity the wife, and the world would move on. Only one person knew the truth, and by the time they gathered evidence from the wreckage, she was already gone. Lillian met Greg on his 30th birthday. The event was held at one of his luxury hotels, a spectacle disguised as generosity. Cameras flashed, guests drank expensive champagne, and Greg Benson, smiling like a saint, handed out cash to promising young entrepreneurs. Free money, no strings attached, or so it seemed. Lillian hadn't come for charity. She came because her best friend wouldn't stop talking about him. Greg Benson, the golden boy, the self-made billionaire, the man who built an empire before most people figured out what they wanted to do with their lives. When she finally saw him, she understood the obsession. He wasn't just handsome, he was present. The kind of presence that bent the room toward him without asking. And then he saw her. She stood apart from the crowd, fair-skinned, striking, composed. Not trying to be noticed, yet impossible not to notice. She didn't look like someone waiting for a handout. She looked like someone who had already survived hunger and humiliation, and refused to be impressed. Greg approached her himself. He introduced himself. And Lillian did something that caught him off guard. She didn't fawn, didn't giggle, didn't treat him like a trophy. She spoke to him like he was just a man. That single choice fascinated him more than any compliment ever could. They talked. She told him she'd grown up in an orphanage. He told her he had too. She told him she'd worked her way up to branch manager at a major bank. He admired the discipline. She told him she valued privacy, independence, simplicity. Greg smiled like he'd found something rare. Lillian smiled like she'd found a kindred spirit. They married after 6 months, and for a while, she believed she had. The mask didn't slip immediately. For months, Greg played the role perfectly. Attentive husband, generous provider. The man who never raised his voice, never made a scene, never made her feel afraid. But 6 months into the marriage, something shifted. He grew colder, quieter, sharper. He spoke to her like she was an inconvenience, a task that demanded too much attention. If she asked questions, he answered as if she'd insulted him. If she tried to fix it, he treated her attempts like noise. Lillian confronted him one evening. He raised his voice. So did she. That was her mistake. The first time he hit her, she was 3 months pregnant. He didn't slap her in anger the way weak men did. Greg Benson was too controlled for that, too deliberate. He beat her as if he were teaching a lesson. By the time it was over, she had lost the baby. Lillian tried to leave. She packed a bag, withdrew cash, planned her escape with the precision of a woman who had learned long ago not to rely on luck. But within hours, her bank accounts were frozen. Her job was gone. Her identity was suddenly unusable. And then the threats began. Friends who tried to help her lost their jobs. Others were warned so severely they stopped calling her back. Some people simply vanished from her life without explanation, like she had never known them. Greg didn't just have money, he had power. The kind of power that sits quietly behind politicians, the kind that makes judges answer calls, the kind that convinces police officers to look the other way. Not because they're paid, but because they're afraid. Lillian understood the terrible truth. She wasn't trapped by love. She was trapped by fear. So she returned home. Greg Benson was not born into wealth. He was forged in deprivation, sharpened by it. He didn't grow up loved. He grew up hungry. And hunger teaches a man what softness never will. At 12, he caught a priest abusing a child. And instead of reporting it, he learned something better. Secrets are currency. Greg blackmailed the priest into funding his education. By 15, half the community's elders were paying him for silence. By adulthood, he had mastered leverage like an art form. It wasn't intelligence alone that built his empire. It was precision, telecommunications, banking, real estate, aviation, petroleum, anything profitable, anything that could bend people under its weight. He learned early that if you control what people need, you control people. And if you control people long enough, you become untouchable. Greg Benson was untouchable, and he knew it. Lillian had married a man who treated human beings like investments. She loved him. He acquired her. Once the transaction was complete, his interest vanished. 2 years into the marriage, Lillian had suffered 3 more miscarriages, all from his fists. Not every night was violent. That was the cruelty of it. Greg was never sloppy. He didn't need chaos every day. He only needed enough pain to keep her obedient. Slowly, Lillian stopped praying, stopped hoping, stopped imagining escape. A Bible gathered dust somewhere in the house, forgotten like an old friend. Alcohol replaced it. Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, anything strong enough to numb the body and soften the mind. The assaults continued. He took what he wanted. She endured. Depression wrapped itself around her like a second skin. But even at her lowest, Lillian refused suicide. Some part of her, buried beneath fear, beneath whiskey, beneath years of being reduced to an object, still believed she deserved to live. Lillian sat on the living room couch, her third bottle half empty. She had 31 teeth left. Greg knocked one out last week. Her eyes drifted across the room and landed on his golf club, resting casually against the wall, as if it didn't belong to a man who enjoyed destruction in private. Greg had been out that morning. Country club, CEOs, politicians, men like him. She picked the club up. It was heavier than she expected. Solid, clean, strong. And as she held it, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not rage, something colder. The fear that had ruled her for years began to crack. She walked into the kitchen and turned on the gas, all 4 burners. No flame, just the hiss of poison bleeding into the air. The smell crept through the mansion like a sickness. Perfect. Upstairs, Greg stirred, annoyed, furious, woken from sleep by something inconvenient, because that's what Lillian had become to him. His footsteps thundered toward the stairs. Lillian stepped into the shadows, golf club in hand, breath controlled. Greg descended fast, rage blinding him. As his foot left the final step, she swung. The club struck the back of his skull with a sound that didn't belong in a home. He dropped instantly, and Lillian didn't stop. The second blow shattered something vital. The third ensured there would be no miracle. The fourth and fifth were not for the pain alone, but for the years he had stolen from her. When she finally stopped, her arms shook, not from regret, from exhaustion. She stared at what remained of Greg Benson, billionaire, tyrant, monster, and felt nothing at all. No guilt, no relief, just emptiness. Then she cried. Not for him. For herself. For the woman she used to be. For the parts of her he broke into pieces she would never fully recover. But through the tears, a smile found her mouth. Greg Benson had spent his life conquering everything. Now, even in death, he would try to conquer hell. The thought amused her. The gas burned her throat now, stung her eyes, filled her lungs with poison. She picked up a matchbox and walked to the door. At the threshold, she struck a match and tossed it behind her. The mansion ignited, not slowly, not politely. It erupted into a roaring inferno, swallowing wealth, secrets, and cruelty in the same hungry flame. Lillian walked away. Only when she reached the gate did she turn back. The house was a furnace, consuming everything inside. For a moment, she wondered if she would ever be forgiven. Then she decided she didn't care. Hell's flames couldn't touch her. She had already survived worse. At 31, this was her second chance, and she was taking it. The headline screamed across every news outlet. Billionaire tycoon Greg Benson and wife perish in tragic house fire. Investigators called it a gas leak, an accident, a tragedy. No one questioned it. No one looked for her, because men like Greg Benson didn't have enemies who survived long enough to strike back. Except one. Somewhere far from the ashes, Lillian was walking into a new life, and she had already forgiven herself.